Welcome to the Howl Studios podcast, episode 2. This is a very important episode where we're going to be discussing about the Black Lives Matter movement. And today I have a very special word with me today. First, we have Cairo Christian Abelard. He is 18 years old and graduated from CCMHS. He's on his way to pursue a bachelor in science and electrical engineering and a minor in computer science. Next, we have Naomi Armstrong, who is a rising senior at Cypress Creek Middle High School this upcoming fall. She's hoping to pursue a career in investigation and enjoys drawing and loves to watch horror movies. Reid, who is a recent high school graduate from Orlando with a passion for composing and performing jazz and contemporary fusion, as well as representing global viewpoints through MUN, which is Model of the United Nations. We also have Paulo Nava, who is a 17-year-old photographer from Tampa. He's going to be in his senior year soon, and he's hoping to pursue a degree in journalism. He also has a passion for creative portraits and recently started attending local protests to capture the stories of Black Lives Matter movement. Helena Rodriguez, who is 18 years old and is a recent graduate from Creative Writing Magnet Arts program at Blake High School in Tampa. She is a self-published author with a passion for art history and is planning to attend Flagler College in St. Augustine in the fall. Next we have is Madison Gayle, who is 16 years old and is going to be a junior at CCMHS this fall. She's passionate about dancing and is hoping to pursue a career involving the arts in the future. I'll start with the first question. What is the Black Lives Matter movement? How did it originate? And more so, what is it trying to achieve?
So essentially the Black Lives Matter movement, from my understanding, started with just a hashtag in 2013. And this was to highlight the situation in 2012 after the shooting of George Zimmerman.
I mean, I'm fairly new to the movement myself, but when I was looking at the mission statement on the website, it was basically saying that they're working towards creating a world free of anti-Blackness, where every Black person has the social, economic, and political power to thrive.
And while I think the official hashtag and the official movement started in 2013 after George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin and received no criminal punishment, I think it's important to recognize that the movement isn't new. It's not a reaction to the one shooting. It's not a reaction to what we've seen in recent weeks, recent years. It's a reaction to the history of this country.
Thank you guys so much for sharing. When did you decide to join the movement, or how did this movement personally affect you? What are some things that you've done to contribute to the movement, and how has being in this movement changed you?
So I'm not going to lie, I had only really come around to the movement about 2 weeks ago. Simply put, I had never truly been one for movements because as far as my political standpoint, I am a registered independent. So as far as my mindset goes, I'm always stuck in the middle between what I feel is right and what I feel is wrong. And on both sides of the spectrum, as far as the political parties, I feel like both sides have an equal amount of right as they do wrong. And that's why it had taken me such a long time to come around to using the hashtag Black Lives Matter when I had posted something that I felt was important to me. But the Black Lives Matter movement is so important to me because being a Black man in America, it really, like, you can really see the parallel between everyone that has it good and everyone that has to worry about anything that can happen to them whenever they simply walk out of their door. And I'm starting to realize that I have experienced some sort of adversity whenever I'd be going about my day-to-day activities, whether it's just going to work, hanging out with friends. And it's not even just seeing that I'm experiencing it. I'm seeing that people that look just like me, that I would consider brothers and sisters, had been facing this sort of adversity. And I didn't want to feel as if me not supporting this movement is me just saying it's not happening to me, so what does it matter? I feel like it's a lot more important to be progressive with the movement. And that's why I had just recently taken part in supporting Black Lives Matter.
Thank Thank you, Cairo, for sharing that. Madison, would you like to share how you personally got more involved with the recent events and how you contributed to the movement?
Well, I feel like I've been kind of involved with it since 2012 because, of course, it was like a shock for everyone. But more recently, I feel like I've been more vocal about it because I've been thinking more and more about like this could literally happen to anyone. And I'm learning more like from my family's experiences and like what they've told me of experiences in their past. So I know that it affects my family directly and like it also affects me. So it like changed the way I think about people and the way I think about the system as a whole. So yeah, it's like very important for me to speak out and like use my voice about it now.
It's good that you are saying. I have seen youth and teenagers posting a lot more social media posts stuff, or they're going out to protest. I know that 3 of you guys here actually went to protest or have participated in them. Although I know that you've also been to protest 2 of them, I believe. Would you like to share?
Sure. So I kind of got into it after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, and that really shook me because it was like it was unlike anything I've ever seen. Like it's literally a modern day lynching what we saw, and people were recording, and the guy was recording his murder, and it was the most insane thing I saw. So that really shook me, and that's when I really started. It was like, wow, I need to get involved in this. And so then once protests started happening around me, I felt like I needed to be there to capture this like historic moment in our nation's history, because this is like the beating of Rodney King. Like this is to that level, maybe even more, because it's spread through. They didn't have social media when Rodney King happened, so I think it's even increased more. But once those protests are happening around me, I said I need to be there. I need to be capturing these stories, and also to contribute to the awareness of the Black Lives Matter movement through Instagram and other social media platforms. When it comes to how it's personally affected me, I think it's brought out this like, and I would have preferred this to be brought out any other way than this, but this like passion that I have in photography, and especially for photojournalism and capturing these like world-changing events that are happening literally like 20 minutes from me, and that's insane. But I feel like this is something all across the world that even if it's through an iPhone camera or through an expensive camera, it's something that everyone should be participating in. And I feel like I need to be there to get the shot that no one else is getting, to tell the story that eventually will become news the next day. And I need to make sure that people's voices are heard. And
Thank you. Mitchell, would you like to share how you got involved into the movement?
Yeah. So my involvement was definitely inspired by Charlottesville in 2017. I remember just sitting there all day and just watching the scenes coming in from Charlottesville, the rallies that were happening there. I remember the truck being driven into the field of counter-protesters, and I sat there, and I also was getting flashbacks to Pulse the year before here in Orlando, and that was really eye-opening to me. And I thought, okay, this is definitely a problem, and I think now we all have an obligation to speak up against it and to do something about that. It was definitely after Charlottesville that I decided I need to get in on the.
Well, this movement has always been something I've been kind of aware of, and it's not necessarily something I never really joined. I mean, it didn't really start getting like, I mean, it was always talked about, but it didn't start getting talked about as much as within the last couple of weeks. And whenever it would be mentioned at, unfortunately, another death of a Black person, I would always show my support. So I consider myself to have always been sort of a part of it, and always show my support towards it. And I kind of feel like you know, if I didn't, that'd just be odd because I am a person of color. So I just, you know, I kind of, I feel like I probably like have to, you know.
Sorry, my name cut in the beginning, so. But I've always sort of considered myself someone who values equality and cares about Black lives. Unfortunately, I didn't really get involved into the movement until the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. However, this has been something that has been important and a driving force in my life. My junior year of high school, I was in a pretty serious interracial relationship that kind of changed the way I view a lot of things, especially race. As a white person, it's very easy to become detached from Black Lives Matter because a lot of the discussions that I have, it just doesn't feel like our place or our problem, which isn't necessarily the stance that I take. But in 2013, before I was actively taking the time to educate myself on the subject of race and racism, that was sort of the view I had. I didn't really have a say in it. I didn't know what I could do. But, once I started to picture the Black people that I cared about in my life in the positions of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, the issue hit closer to home. And while the pandemic has sort of kept me from protesting as much as I would like to, I have gone out, I have protested, I have showed my support, taken up a lot of online activism, signing petitions, and dedicating much of my social media presence to spreading and sharing information relevant to the movement that way.
You guys give great answers. Sorry if it's like I cut off and then I switch over to the next person. Going to be cold. I really do appreciate you guys' answers. They're really well thought out. Now we're just going to transition over to the block questions. These are questions that were taken by the public. Specifically, the first one, transition from Helena, what you said about being active online. We have, I don't know if you guys have seen, but you guys know the term superficial activism.
Yeah.
Also known as slacktivism.
What is your stance on superficial activism? And do you believe people should be called out if you think that they're being genuine but being active, advocating on their accounts? Do you think, what is your stance on specifically the Blackout Tuesday posts?
When it comes, sorry.
No, you can go first, Naomi.
Okay. Honestly, when it came out to the Blackout Tuesday and the I don't know what it was called. It was like the thing where you tag 10 people on your story, something like that. I did do those, but at the time I really didn't understand like the point of it. And I mean I get like the point of it, but like especially like with the tagging 10 people, I didn't really see what that was trying to do. So I didn't tag 10 people. I just kind of said something along the lines of you can repost this if you want to. Cuz I feel like the whole point of activism is to get it like spread it out, get information. And that's kind of hard to do when you're only tagging 10 people you already know or people you're already close to. I mean, it's not really getting out to anyone except the people you tag or the people that specifically view your stories. So I definitely think performative activism is definitely a thing, especially on people who did like the Blackout Tuesday and have said like nothing else on the matter, simply to like as if it's like a trend. So yeah, that's not cool. So
For me, me specifically, I feel as if it is very hard for me to dictate whether or not someone's activism towards the Black Lives Matter movement or going against anything or any type of adversity that had been done to Black people. Like, it's really hard for me to dictate who is and who is not genuine with their activism within the movement. I personally had posted something specifically on my Instagram story that said, don't tell people that their activism isn't genuine because it ruins the incentive and knocks down the people who may actually be genuinely active within this movement. Because I don't feel as if anyone should be the voice that tells someone you aren't doing it right. I feel like any type of support that Black people can get from any source is important. It's good. And it only helps further our goal for us to be equal. And yeah, like I said, like I don't feel as if the whole performative activism thing should be put on anybody because we can never dictate anybody's intentions. Calling people out for performative activism um, is, like, for lack of a better word, detrimental because anybody can be called out for it, no matter how genuine they in themselves feel as if they are being. Anybody can say anything about the way somebody is protesting or being active within the movement. And I don't feel as if that is necessarily okay.
Speakers, because specifically with the Blackout Tuesday, it almost did kind of seem like a trend after a while because people would like post the black screen on their Instagram and then they'll go post like a beach picture and like my recent on their story, not really speaking out about the Black Lives Matter movement and really recognizing what's going on. But I also feel like it's kind of hard to differentiate whether you should call out someone or not because this time is for like to inform people and to people for people to like recognize the past and modern realities of Black people to like figure out what it really means and not to just be silent about it. But I agree, it is hard to tell whether you should confront them or not.
I agree that it is really hard to tell when somebody is being genuine when they're just tagging people or posting a black picture. And I definitely agree that we shouldn't immediately call somebody out when we think that they're just doing it to be performative. However, I think we need to take a different approach to people who are in positions of power. I think recently we saw Nancy Pelosi and other House Democrats. They wore kente cloth and kneeled on the House floor, it's a nice kind of solidarity. But symbols like kneeling exist for people like us who are not in charge of this system that perpetrates this racism to try and get them to do something. So when they go out and just kneel and then call it a day and then go back to the House floor to give more funding to police, it's seen as really hypocritical. A lot of people within the movement because we're kneeling to get you to do something. And you're essentially saying, we hear you and we see you, but we're not going to listen to you. And I definitely think we need to call out those people in power that are just being performative.
Those actions need to be followed with policy and change. It can't just be like some glitzy glamour show. Something needs to come after it. And like it's kind of tying the conversation back to the tag 10 friends or keep the chain going, the Blackout Tuesday post. When it comes to like everyday people like ourselves who don't necessarily have the pull outside of our own circles, I don't see like how raising awareness within our own small communities is that bad of an idea, as long as you're following up those actions with like going on behind the scenes. Like, yes, you're posting a black square, but then you're also either going to protest, donating to organizations, signing petitions, using your social media platform to advocate in other ways. When people who have large followings, like celebrities, all they do is post a black screen or post a tag 10 friends, it's like, wow, queen, give us nothing. Like, because where is that doing? We're all already seeing those black squares. What we would like to see is donating some of your finances to some of these organizations. A lot of celebrities have actually been like going out and protesting. These are people that we look up to, and a lot of people idol. So when your idols are going out and advocating for something, then their followers are more likely to go out and advocate for something as well. So that's when performative activism kind of gets like a little blurred around the edges,
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. As far as people in power, I know that you all saw how John Boyega had went to go out and protest and he was afraid for his career, but also he had said that this movement is more important than his career. And John Boyega is someone that at this point in time I really do look up to, but in the past it was just Star Wars. He's a black character in Star Wars. I really like Star Wars, and there is someone within the movie that I can relate to and I can look up to as someone that I can see as a hero. But and Lucasfilms put it in the best way possible. They're like, John Boyega is our hero because he is standing like in, I guess you could say, in the crossfire of risking his career and standing up for what he feels is right. And they called him a hero for it. So as far as that, his actions are extremely powerful because he is stuck in between a rock and a hard place, but he is actively doing what he felt was right. And I do feel as if there should be more celebrities that do that.
Because then it ties in that whole, like, not only is he a hero in the movies to all these kids, but then he's also taking like the essence of like kind of what Star Wars is and bringing that to like the table and showing like, oh, this isn't just fantasy. This is something that we can do in our real life. And, you know, going to protests is great, but just to kind of like gear the subject in another direction, if you're going to protests and you're taking pictures of yourself protesting, you know, I feel like sometimes that draws and this is completely separate from your point from Cairo, but when you take pictures of yourself protesting, I feel like it draws attention away from what the movement is and then back onto yourself. And, you know, I feel like that's something that's worth discussing, and I would really like to hear your guys' input on that because I'm curious to see what you guys have to say about people like posting pictures of themselves at the protests.
Yeah, I saw a couple of my friends post graduation photos. They were going out with their graduation, their like gowns, and they were going out. And I mean, I understand, Cairo, your like hesitation and not calling out those people to make sure they're not genuine. And I'm sure some of those people in graduation gowns really believe in the movement, maybe. But it was like, you want your graduation to be something like a happy moment, and being defined by the protests. And it was just super like slimy, like seeing them like smiling and posing in front of all these people protesting Black Death, and it's so conflicting. So, people taking pictures of themselves. I really don't know where to call the line there because in some people, I mean, it's different for me because I'm a photographer. The majority of my page is pictures of not me. So I can see where in some cases other people, where the majority of them is to post, hey, this is what I'm doing. Hey, this is me right now. Maybe I can see that, but for like a photography perspective, I don't know. It's just me, but a lot of photographers know when people are milking things. So, for example, a photographer would go to one protest and make 5 different posts about that one protest, and then at a point, you're like, I know that you're doing this for likes because your engagement and your awareness, your likes have gone up astronomically. Just because you say you support this cause, and I can see you milking it over and over and over again, and that's not cool. So that's where I stand.
Because I guess like this isn't a trend. It's not something to add to your feed. You know, people are actually dying out there, and it's important to show that you're supportive. And then, you know, that we were talking about whether or not we should be calling out performative activists, but a personal experience where, you know, that's gone very south. And Cairo's point about when you point someone out that they're doing it wrong, it kind of not unmotivates them, but, you know, they have to like step back, and then they feel like, my God, was anything that I was doing right? And I guess there's no right way to go about doing this. It's just important to kind of like check your privilege before going into the situation. Like obviously, everyone has different reasons for coming to this movement, but you just have to make sure that you're doing it for the wrong reason. You're doing it for the right reasons and not the wrong reasons. And sometimes the wrong reasons I feel like would be feeling pressured to participate to prove that you're not racist. Like I know that that's been kind of an issue for some community leaders, like that restaurant owner in Tampa. You know, Oxford Exchange got called out because they were posting diversity pictures but then they weren't advocating for the movement. And, you know, now they made a post after being called out, but the sincerity of that's kind of taken aback because, you know, we're called out first.
The whole social media aspect of this movement is such a big double-edged sword for us organizers because the movement started as a hashtag, was first a social media movement, and then it translated into real world action and protests. And I think us organizers and marchers have been really good at capitalizing on that. We're able to share those videos you've seen of police officers tear gassing and pepper spraying peaceful protesters who are breaking the law. We're able to share information on when and how we're protesting, able to make sure that everything is peaceful through signal apps. The double-edged nature of it is that police and those in power can also utilize those same tools. I think here in Orlando, I know here in Orlando, there was one protest in which the police chief took a knee to protesters right outside the police headquarters. And that photo, of course, went really big, just like the rest of the police propaganda does. And then 25 minutes later, we were tear gassed. And which one did the local news report on? They reported on this great show of solidarity from the police chief, not that he was suppressing First Amendment protesters. I think that's really the biggest challenge with it, that right now social media has just reverted back to the same bubble state it always has been. It's really hard to break out of our bubbles and into the others.
What you like ends up circulating. So if you end up liking those videos of police standing in solidarity, then that's what you're going to continue to be. And if that's the kind of mindset you and your followers also have, that's the information to continue circulating. So it's a really powerful tool, but it's also one that can be twisted, like you said, at the double edge.
Absolutely. You guys brought great points, especially I will say I have been guilty of posting the black box post. I will admit that I did add information to it, but honestly, I mean, most people aren't going to look at a black box and then swipe and read the information. But looking at it, I was also curious of like, how is this helping out the movement? Besides, you know, I was signing petitions, but it was just very odd for black boxes to be appearing on my feed and then really nothing else going on. This question sort of ties into not exactly cop propaganda, but more so teenager submitted this question, which is basically, what is ACAB? How would you explain ACAB?
I would like to speak on that because I do have a bit of a discretion with the ACAB movement. So basically, ACAB stands for, and correct me if I'm wrong, all cops are bastards. And it's, from my understanding, it is essentially a symbol for the fact that people have lost all trust in local police and all police departments. And I feel as if this has happened because police departments aren't holding each other accountable. There can be a huge influx of police officers that are supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, but they won't hold each other accountable for their actions. It's kind of just like every police department for themselves type thing. And that's why I feel as if people have lost hope and trust in the police department. In my personal experience, I have been very fortunate to not have any trouble with police officers. And I guess that in of itself had formed a sort of, I don't know if bias is the right word, but I just don't have any issues with police officers. But the more and more that I see my people facing adversity with police officers, the more and more I'm starting to understand why people believe that all cops are bastards. Do I necessarily co-sign that notion? Not necessarily, because I personally don't feel as if all cops are bastards. But do I understand that there had been people out there that are facing adversity and people that sympathize with them? Do I understand that that's how they feel and they have a right to feel that way? Yes. And will I try my best to understand more where this comes from, why it came about, and why people feel that way? Yes.
I think it's important to note that all cops are bastards isn't saying that all cops are bad, but rather pointing out that the police are a part of a corrupt or bastardized system, and the definition of bastardized is to be corrupt. So it's not saying that they're bad, it's just saying that the community that they're a part of is corrupted, and it's bringing attention to that. Now, obviously, experience with the police is going to be very different from someone else's experience with the police, and just important to note that regardless if the issue isn't affecting you personally, that doesn't mean that the issue isn't affecting other people in serious ways. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having police murdering Black people. There is a dangerous aspect to their job, and I think that had they undergone more training and prepared them for situations like some other countries do, then maybe we wouldn't be in the position we are today. But, we're having these protests to effectively either step to funding the department as a whole or forming it in a way that it does protect all citizens, just not one portion of society.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, sorry.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. All cops are bastards is not necessarily speaking for. It's not necessarily speaking for like every single individual who is a part of the police system. It's more the system itself. And honestly, I completely understand it. I hear this argument getting thrown around a lot, which it's a really dumb argument. It's where people say, how come we can say all cops are bastards, but we can't say all Black people are, insert like a stereotype or something. Which is dumb because, being a police officer is an occupation, something you could change rather easily, or in the most part, pretty easily, unless there's another situation, but then again, we don't know. And it's like what I've always thought to myself is that if you truly think the system's corrupt, then just quit. And I know that's not necessarily easy, like if that's like the main source of like income for like a family or something. But if it isn't, then I'm just sitting here wondering, then what necessarily are you doing? I mean, I know there's a lot of people who want to protect the community, and that I find that a good thing, but that doesn't change that the system is like completely corrupt at this point. The police system honestly acts like a gang at this point throughout America, and it's a little bit troubling. So would I necessarily do I necessarily think that all cops are like bad people? No. But I can definitely understand the acronym, especially depending on what was previously said, like depending on where you live.
Yeah, I think that the ACAB acronym, I think more calls out to me at least, it more calls out the brotherhood aspect that exists within the police. Just kind of, it's funny that you guys said that it was all cops are bastards, and I think it's interesting how like meanings change over the internet. I never heard that. I heard all cops are bad, and I've never heard all cops are bastards. But regardless, I think it's calling out the brotherhood aspect that the police have, not taking responsible for their own or more willing to protect their own instead of calling out those actions. I don't know if you've seen, there's a video that came out of a white police officer pushing down a protester that was sitting or kneeling and just pushing them over. And a woman of color who was also a police officer came up and just started yelling at him, screaming at him, being responsible for their own. And I think that's more what ACAB is trying to expose, is that toxic loyalty that police officers have with each other. Not,
Because their motto is to protect and serve, but they're not supposed to be protecting and serving each other. They're supposed to be protecting and serving the people. And
I definitely agree that there are too many issues with policing in America to count. However, I do disagree with the notion that this is because there's a lack of training or a lack of funding. The issue that comes with policing is because of the foundation it's on. Police in America evolved out of slave catchers, and the people that join the police know this. The people that apply to police academies know that they're going to be enforcing racist and discriminatory laws. Don't really think that there's any police officer who shows up on the first day of the force and then finds out that they're going to be oppressing people. I think that the issue with police is the existence of the police. And I'm not here to advocate for entirely abolishing them overnight. However, I think that we should be putting more money to training them, because at that point you're just polishing a turd.
I completely agree. Like, especially when someone brought up the point of people's personal experiences with police. I feel like those personal positive experiences should not negate the fact that like the institution is violent and unjust. But like personally also being taught that, you know, be respectful always, because like I feel like everyone's always taught like always be respectful and all that, but being like a Black child in America and growing up here, it's like my parents had to teach me certain things not to do and what to do and to be so careful around police. And I feel like that's very important to note. And also the argument that Blue Lives Matter, saying that Blue Lives Matter too, and that we shouldn't just be focusing on Black Lives Matter, all that whole debate. And also going back to that police do know like what they're getting into, like they're signing up for it, and they can also change that later, you know, in the game.
Let's dismantle this Blue Lives Matter thing right now. Someone tell me what a blue life is, because there's no such thing. It's a suit. Y'all put that on, y'all can take that off. Black people can't take off their skin color.
Mitchell, you did mention about how it's the foundation that the police system is based on, which is basically why like the system is so corrupt and why cops are just not doing their job all correctly. And it ties into the next question, which is someone asked, what actions do you think the government should take towards fixing systemic racism?
So there's a bit of information that I've come about or come across as far as companies and institutions having to meet a quota. This quota being the ratio of the majority to the minorities. And this applies to colleges. This applies to the workplace. I don't know necessarily about like public school, but I know that this quota is essentially disproportionately aligned to have more white people, and then to just have a specific amount of the minority so that the company doesn't look racist in the eyes of the public. I had a discretion with affirmative action. I had a thing about that because there were people that felt as if it was a racist movement trying to help Black people have a better opportunity to getting into college. I felt as if this was good because it was kind of skewing the quota in a way that would make it so that there were an equal amount of the minority in a college to make it at least feel as if we all were getting the same opportunity.
And I mean, just to take smaller microcosmic view of what you're saying is that like racism isn't something that's inherent. You know, we're not born racist. It's something that's learned and it's taught and it's perpetuated by systems that are put into place. If more people have access to education and our education system is kind of skewed away from the Eurocentric, white-focused view of history that we've had so far, and we take the time and the care to educate ourselves on the history of racism, you know, colorism, discrimination, and even just microaggression, you know, we can correct that in our children so that way they're growing up to become informed, compassionate, quality-seeking adults. So the access to education and getting more Black people to go to college and entering the workforce and giving them the opportunity to, you know, become proponents of change in themselves is also like a huge, huge part of that. But I mean, it's not like abolishing racism or removing it from our society isn't going to be an overnight fix. You know, it's just so deeply ingrained into our everyday lives that police brutality is just one issue amongst many other issues in this umbrella of systemic racism. You know, as citizens, we need to start voting people into power that are willing to make change, you know, and then those people that we put into place, if we don't become those people ourselves, then the government can work towards different things like, you know, the 13th Amendment didn't completely abolish slavery, you know, it said that slavery is allowed if it's used in as a form of punishment. So, you know, our prison systems are basically legalized slavery. And if we decriminalize marijuana, which is like makes up a huge portion of the arrests of Black people in this country, if we decriminalize marijuana, then you know a lot of these people aren't being put away and put into prison. Because although Black people make up only, I think, 13% of the population, like 60% of our prison population. And then there's also other things like requiring diversity training, the whole 8 can't wait when it comes to police. Not, I know a lot of people are calling for the defunding of the police as well, but you know, also just working to amend the racial judicial system, pull the Black community out of poverty, like through programs of relief funds and improving education. Because if we improve education, this is a long rant, but if going to your local school, because a lot of people can't afford private school, your school is being funded by the community. So if you're living in a relatively poor Black population, and your schools are going to be funded from the taxes that are pulled from that area. So if the people who are being taxed don't have enough money to begin with, then by default your schools are going to be not as good. And then your access to proper education isn't going to be not as good, and it just becomes kind of like this rolling cycle of like, okay, Black people are like always one step behind. So just doing small things like that in the end kind of snowball into bigger avenues of change. I was talking about.
You brought up a good point about the schools being funded by the community, and I think creating a more equal education around the country is definitely a first step towards getting rid of systemic racism. For example, in Orlando and in a lot of other places around the country, we spend about 148 times more on policing than we actually do on housing and community development. If cities around the country were to actually invest in communities in their city, that would naturally lead to higher property taxes, which would lead to better school, which would lead to more access to education, which would lead to more higher education for citizens of color in that city. And I think that's why we need to work from funding the police into actual community investment. And also on the 8 Can't Wait that's been getting popular recently, the 8 Can't Wait doesn't actually stop police violence in cities that it's been happening. Chokeholds have been illegal in New York for about 30 years now, and that didn't stop their murder of Eric Garner. I think they've outlawed them about 5 different times. It's the first time because they don't stop using them. The 8 Can't Wait protocols don't stop police from. They're just more rules for the police to break. The police don't want to have a sense of accountability, so they never will have a sense of accountability. And that's why, if we want to move forward as a country, we need to defund them. And we need to put that money back into communities. We need to put it into economic development.
That is true.
I believe that there should be some sort of organization that oversees policing, especially because there's nobody that's specifically there that's able to just overlook what the officers are doing. It's just one step. It isn't like a step that's going to fix all of it, but at least it's going to make sure that they're taken accountable and they're not able to easily slip through the judicial system.
So I just wanted to touch on something as far as the police brutality, and something that I feel as if people should be educated on, especially the people that don't feel as if what happened to George Floyd was anything wrong, or any type of situation where an officer may have misread a situation and killed the person that was in pursuit. So when you become a police officer, you go through self-defense training, and there are a few specific types of martial art that they teach you within this self-defense program. They teach you traditional jiu-jitsu, judo, aikido, hapkido, and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So essentially, these moves are essentially taught in just self-defense, or to detain someone that the police officers may feel as if are dangerous. In the video, the 10-minute video of the police officer kneeling on George Floyd's neck, one of the black men that was standing on the street had mentioned to the police officer that was kneeling on George Floyd's neck that he had training, and the way that the officer was restraining George Floyd was intentional, and it was a kill move. So essentially, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there is a move that you use to keep your opponent on the ground. It is a move they use where you place your knee on the other person's neck and your back leg to support, and you hold them down by their shoulders. This officer, from my eyes, and having training with this move, the officer had targeted the coronary artery that goes down the sides of your neck, and this shows us that if you put pressure on this part of your neck, it stops you from being able to breathe, or at least it hinders your ability to breathe. So I just wanted to push that so that people see that the officer, it shows us more that the officer may have had an intent to kill. And if you guys had seen the autopsy, or any of the autopsy reports, it has showed that it was a homicide. And with that bit of knowledge, I hope that people have more of an understanding and understand why more why it was a homicide, because there were a lot of people that had been misinformed or didn't understand why, and didn't think that, or thought that it may have been kind of biased against the police as to the scientists dictating that it was a homicide, even though they are scientists.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I also like the point made up earlier about prisons and the 13th Amendment, because I find it funny how people arguing against Black Lives Matter and police brutality, they always state something about the Constitution and the amendments and how people have the right to defend themselves, but then they don't consider like how these like institutions and systems have been ingrained to like always be against a certain group of people, Black people. And that also goes along with like voting. When Black people first got the right to vote, there were like lots of systems put in place to prevent them from voting, like all the tests. So I feel like that's a very good point to bring up in this argument.
And that's still happening here in Florida. That we recently had to pass a law through a citizen proposal to give felons who have paid their jail fees, who have done their time, the right to vote back. This was a move put up by legislators because the majority of Florida's inmates are Black and other people of color, and they want to deprive them of their right to vote. And even after the citizen proposal went through to give them back the right to vote, the governor instituted all these new fees that they had to pay, which are, the Supreme Court said it was a new form of a poll tax. So those issues that you brought up are still here. And it's honestly sad.
I mean, a system can't fail someone it was never designed to protect. You know, the system has always worked against Black people since the beginning. You know, they move an inch, we go back 3 miles. You know, the only way to really change that is to get people in positions who are willing to make those changes.
Absolutely. Brings us to the next topic, next question, which is, why is it so important for our generation to take notice and become activists in this movement? Do you believe remaining silent and ignorant is hurting the movement, and if so, how? I just want to say this before you guys can go ahead and answer. To everyone who is 18 or older who is listening to this, it is vital for you to be able to go and register to vote. I cannot stress how it is very important that you use your voice if you want to be impactful in a way that you can't go to protest or sign as much petitions as you can. You should definitely go out and try to register. I understand that some people have registered as independent. However, we do live in Florida and the system is kind of skewed, so you may have to register for specifically Democratic or Republican Party for your vote to be able to count in the primary voting. So just know that you do have a voice, you are 18 or older, and you should go out and register if you want to be able to help make some more change in our mental system, which will then hopefully ripple out and help benefit minority communities, especially the Black community.
Touching on our generation, ever since their inception, police have been an oppressive force in America. But the attacks on September 11th were the day that police budgets skyrocketed across America, and the day that the War on Terror began, the Patriot Act, all these things that allowed police to indefinitely overreach any sort of notion of protecting and serving their community. And I think the vast majority of our generation was never even born in a world before that time. So I think now that we're coming of voting age, we're coming of age where we can protest and we can assemble as our generation. We can stand together. I think it is vastly important for us to do so. Otherwise, we will never see a better world. It'll just, yeah. I think if we don't do anything now, we will never see a better world.
Personally, I feel as if it is extremely important to be active within the movement, if you care about the movement. And I feel as if it is important to care about the movement because it is something that will affect all of us on a local and a national level. Um, and like you said, it is extremely important to vote if you do have the ability to vote. And I feel as if it is irresponsible to not do so. As far as staying silent, um, whatever reason somebody has for staying silent, I won't ridicule them or tell them uh, you're wrong or you are detrimental to whatever is going on right now. But I will tell them, like, hey, maybe it would be better for everybody and maybe for yourself if you were to be active within this movement. Um, yeah, and that's essentially it. I just feel as if it's extremely important to be active if you can be active.
I mean, I feel like staying silent is being compliant, and regardless if we decide to call the person out or not, our generation, more so than those in the past, has the biggest advantage of free speech because of the internet, you know? It takes so little to speak out, to spread information, and to educate ourselves. The only way to stay ignorant in the subject of Black Lives Matter is to avoid educating yourself because there's just so much out there. There's really no excuse for keeping yourself in the dark on this one.
It's one of those situations where you don't have to, but you probably should take a side. I don't, because it's just one of those things that it's kind of hard to be neutral on, and I don't really understand how you can be neutral on it, because this is a matter of like people's lives, and by saying, oh well, maybe it's not as bad as it is, you're being compliant to the side of the the police system. And it's one of those things where that, like, there are certain situations where silence isn't necessarily ignorant, but in this situation it kind of is, because this is a lot bigger than just other like arguments or conflicts. This is essentially going back to the history of America and looking at it in like a way that is, I don't know how to describe it. It's essentially what this movement is trying to change, not necessarily change history, but change the way that it can be perceived, so to say, and more so like trying to benefit future generations to not have to deal with something like this. So I do think silence is ignorance at this point.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think it is important to like have conversations with people around you involving this. But like it's kind of weird too because it's not like an I agree, I disagree situation. It's not like, do you like coffee? I do or I don't. It's not like that at all. It's human decency and human rights. It shouldn't be a debate. Racism, homophobia, and sexism shouldn't be a debate at all. So I feel like silence is a hard thing to think about too. Whether, yeah, basically what everyone else said, how it's important to be vocal about it.
Okay, cool. To follow up with what Madison said, I think it's hilarious how Black Lives Matter is a controversial statement. Like, it's hilarious to be there. Like, people are like, no, that's not, like, someone say Black Lives Matter, and they're like, well, but anyways, I hate to be the odd man out here, but I guess that's what this debate is for, or not a debate, but rather a forum. I think it is important to contribute any way you can to this movement, but I know personally for me, especially because COVID-19 has like taken up a majority of the year, and it was really hard for me personally because financial things that were happening in my family. I had to help out in ways that I never thought I would and never wanted to, and like working more than than 60, 70 hours a week trying to help my family pay bills. My father lost his job, and that was already really, really hard. And then the murder of Ahmaud Arbery happened. And then I was just like, I don't think I can take this anymore. And that's why for a bit, from the period between the murder of Ahmaud Arbery to George Floyd, I was kind of oblivious, and I wanted to be oblivious because I don't think I could take that news cycle anymore. I usually listen to the news through a podcast in the mornings, and I don't think I could have taken any more of it. And of course I wanted to help, and that's where I kind of felt a little bit conflicted, because I want to be aware and I want to be informed of what's happening around me, but also it's super draining to hear stories left and right of Black guy shot here, Mexican guy harassed here. It's a very draining, and it's a lot to take in. So that's why I wanted to it's important to note somebody's mental state and mental health before before criticizing them for not being active and not being aware of what's going around.
Yes, absolutely. Apollo, I hope that your brother is doing well. I'm sorry that you're going through that situation. But yeah, of course, addressing just how COVID has kind of brought basically the Black community experiences on a daily basis to the forefront, and us being able to witness that. And like what you just said, Apollo, being like seeing that on social media, becoming overwhelmed with the news, even though, again, they experience it every single day. This is nothing new, what's going on in America. We're just now seeing it and now trying to process and understand what's going on. I hope to actually, you guys did make great points. Of you guys did say that you should try to be active, which of course, absolutely. However, you're being active to the people out there who are listening. Of course, it's always going to benefit the movement, and pertaining to like remaining silent about it. If you feel uncomfortable about this movement and you are not a person of color or you are not part of the Black community, of course you're going to feel uncomfortable because this is not a comfortable subject that is, talked about, or not a comfortable movement at all, because this is pertaining about people's lives. And it may seem overwhelming. You shouldn't feel like you need to be pressured to have to post something and be like, oh yeah, I'm with the movement. Especially what Helena said, do educate yourself about what's going on. There's documentaries that are out there. There's one that Netflix made called 13. I'll probably link it down in the description below.
13.
That is free on YouTube. You should go and watch that. You should also read documents. They're free. They're online. And also, this generation, it's been interesting seeing that we've kind of put aside our caps and gowns or our schoolwork and like picked up signs and have rallied in the streets or been advocating, and it's been amazing seeing how loud and powerful most of our generation has been. I have seen funny posts, just make this a little bit light. I've seen funny posts about how Gen Z will not ask the waiter for mayo, but they will body slam a cop or like one who's being racist, which is quite funny to see, or how our protest signs kind of sway between saying ACAB or like All Lives Matter to pictures of Debbie Ryan and being, do you want to throw down systemic racism system? It's been quite interesting how our generation has processed this into not only understanding that growing up in a world where 9/11 happened, most of us barely remember it, but being in a post 9/11 world and growing up with school shootings, how we've learned to more so stick together as a group and understand that, okay, you got to put like the me aside and try to help us, like the community, is important. But transitioning to next question, which is, why is it so important to have conversations with those that you love at this time, and why is it especially crucial for other people to understand their privilege and responsibility they have towards educating and advocating for the community and supporting this movement?
Sure. I mean, it's no longer enough to be not racist. We have to start making changes to be effectively anti-racist. And, this can start small. It's so important to have conversations with the ones we know and love at this time, because we can correct the racist sentiments within our homes and in our lives, then we can correct it in the world around us. You know, it's just kind of like that 6 degrees of separation, like it just branches out. And eventually, you know, since racism, and I've said this before, it isn't something inherent, it is learned, and it's time to educate ourselves and educate the people around us, and then hopefully that'll catch on and then move into the larger community around us. But I definitely believe that acknowledging one's own privilege is the first step to becoming like a true ally to Black Lives Matter. You know, there's some things that as a white woman I'm never going to be able to understand, but and that's important, but then also being willing to check my own privilege and biases. You know, empathy is one of people's greatest gifts, but actions end up speaking louder than my words do. Knowing my privilege also opens up like new ways to help during protests. Police often are easier on white people. A lot more people are more apt to listen to other white people because we're the majority. So knowing that and other people's implicit biases, I can then turn around and use that to help my Black brothers and sisters and small changes in that way.
I feel. Oh, all right. I'll go first, I guess. Yeah. So I live at a like primarily conservative community. Like I think my county and the surrounding counties, I think in the 2016 election voted like 80% Republican. So highly conservative. You'll see like a bunch of people at my school. You'll see Confederate flags. You'll see all of the Republican conservative stereotypes are there. But I think this, which is, it's sad to say that we needed the death of a Black guy to bring out that acceptance of this in a lot of those conservative communities. I think it's important to have those productive and healthy conversations with those people, even though they might, I don't know, maybe get some like terms wrong, or maybe say something that needs a little correcting. I think it's important to like not be super harsh and be I don't know how to phrase this. Not be very accepting of that. They're trying to be accepting too. They're trying to fit into the community just as much as anybody else's, and maybe their path might be a little weird, a little different. But I just think it's healthy to have those important conversations.
Personally, I feel as if it is extremely important to have these conversations with the people that you care about and any Black person that you may be close to in your life, if you aren't Black. And like you said, it is always okay to make a mistake when it comes to addressing the issue. If you get a term wrong, if you don't understand the culture, if you're trying to align yourself and you get something wrong, I feel as if any Black person that you're talking to should be 100% accepting to that, and also be willing to educate you on what it actually is. What is Black culture? What is the Black Lives Matter movement? How have we been affected by adversity? What we go through in our day-to-day lives, what we have to deal with, and how that makes us feel specifically. As far as myself, I am Haitian American, and it kind of differs because we both of my mom is an immigrant, my father was born here, and both of my parents have had two completely different experiences as far as racial adversity. But for all Black people, they are one and the same, because no matter how strong our features are, what our hair looks like, the color of our skin, we are still under the umbrella of Black people. And because of that, we all have to unify and come together and I guess kind of knock down some of this ethnical prejudice because within my friend group and within the group of Black people that I had been around, it's because I went to Georgia Tech for an engineering program, and I had seen that there were a group of Nigerian kids and a group of kids from Uganda, and then Haitian kids. We were Caribbean, and they were African, and they had realized that we're Caribbean, and they didn't want to associate with us, and that made us Haitian kids feel weird because we're like, but we're all together fighting the same fight, but you don't want to associate with us because we're Caribbean, part Hispanic, and you guys are straight up African. So, and that is like another thing I would want to, I guess, address. Just as far as sticking together, I think it's extremely important for all Black people to stick together and educate anybody that is willing and wanting to understand what is going on.
I'm off of that. If you have the energy and you're willing to educate others, then that's great. But I don't think that it should be the job nor the responsibility of the Black community to educate white people on the systems of oppression that white people put into place, Like, regardless if it was intentional or not, white people and people who can pass off as white, I'm Hispanic, but I look white. So I myself have benefited in some way from racist systems put in this country, whether or not I perpetuate racist ideals or not. Our ancestors are the ones who shaped this society in the way that it was today, and non-Black people of color and white people, it's our responsibility to kind of help shape the future into ones where Black people can feel safe, loved, and considered equals. And inequality it stems beyond just the whole Black and white debate, but being an advocate, regardless if you're white, you're Asian American, you're Hispanic, being an advocate is the least we can do for the Black community,
And if I can give the LGBT plus perspective on this, the LGBT community in America has faced discrimination. I don't think that's a hot take. However, we need to recognize that while we have faced this discrimination, it has cropped up in decades prior. The country was not founded upon our oppression, much like it was for other groups in America. And we also need to recognize that we almost have a privilege with that. And that if we do not project sexuality, nobody will really know. People of color and Black people in America don't have that privilege. I think that it's really important that the LGBT plus community recognize.
And I mean, especially with Stonewall and everything, the Black backing in the LGBT plus movement, a huge part to play in, liberation of LGBT plus rights and things. So acknowledging, and also, there's something that's really, there's a discrepancy that I've noticed within Black Lives Matter, is that a lot of people, even within the Black community, acknowledging that Black Lives Matter, trans Black Lives Matter, Black women's rights matter. To say that Black Lives Matter, we have to acknowledge that, all Black lives matter, and that comes from both sides. The LGBTQ plus community needs to acknowledge the importance of the Black community within their community, and then the Black community needs to acknowledge the importance of LGBTQ people within their community as well. And then, once those two come together, it can become a really, really powerful force. So.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have anything to add on?
I think it's definitely important to talk about this issue, especially with the ones you love, like family and all. and it can be a little bit difficult if, like, per se, your family members don't necessarily agree with your viewpoint, and I know for some people that might be harder to talk about than others. Um, but if they do have, like, if their family or people they're close to are willing to open up their ideas, I definitely think it's important to talk about those. Especially in a situation like this where like being educated on the source material is like extremely important at this point. And yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that because you can learn from things that you agree with and you disagree with. You can kind of learn both sides and like what to do and what not to do. Like having immigrant parents, one being from Jamaica and one being from South America, they kind of both come from different backgrounds, but like it's weird hearing their stories and like this has gone on for such a long time. And I feel like it's really important for people to stay educated and know and understand this historical backgrounds and also how it like kind of moves into what's going on today. So I think it's important to talk to anyone around you. And that also made me think back to what we were saying about calling out people. May not necessarily be calling out, but like having a conversation with that person and kind of just like being like, hey, do you kind of know what you're saying? Or hey, let's just talk about this because, you know, it's not an argument. It's just educating other people about the subject.
Yeah, absolutely. I did see a couple of people, they kind of just, going back to social media, they kind of just ghosted or left social media because they felt uncomfortable. They didn't want to address what was going on because they felt like it didn't exactly affect them. Not affect them, but like relate to them, or they didn't have any responsibility or like saying addressing what was going on and having conversations with them and then trying to understand, oh, you should address this because you have responsibility, because you are part of this community. You should be talking about it or at least educating yourself about this topic. I also want to address that you guys have all really impacted or like done amazing things during this movement. I've seen, Madison, you spoke about racism in the dance community. It's amazing how you are like now using what the movement is and using that traction to address this and make other dancers aware, like, hey, it is not okay, what is going on, we should be talking about this. I don't know if you want to like say a brief statement about it.
I feel like it's so important for me because growing up doing dance practically my whole life, you don't see anyone being a Black dancer, ballet specifically. It's mainly just been focused and geared to white people. So when I was little, I'm like thinking that like, what the heck? Am I really supposed to be doing this? And there's a lot of other young Black dancers that probably think the same way. And there's so much history involving Black people in dance, whether it's through the style, the music, and even like the color of shoes that we wear. Because, you know, the pink ballet shoe, that was for white people because it created an extension of their leg. But being a Black dancer, there's not a lot of Black point shoes. And that's just like, or skin tone point shoes. And that's just like a little itsy bit of how it's difficult being a Black dancer because you don't have those things available to you. You have to take the time and like paint them and all that stuff just to make it to match your skin tone. So yeah, it's very hard to like see these things happening and like it involves everything, even dance. So it's important to note that.
Oh, because I'm also a former dancer. Um, and yeah, I definitely know that there's a lot of bias in the dance community. And that pretty much can go with anything, but especially in dance, because I know that people of color or people with darker skin tones um, typically have to like paint all their stuff, and it's not like, and it's kind of hard to find like things that are like sold to like cater to people like us, and especially like and I'm fortunate because I am light skinned, and it's definitely a lot harder for dancers who are darker, and it's just it's always been hard to like what's it called to like, find products for people who are like it's just hard to like constantly have to like do things yourself when things of that nature can easily be made or easily produced, but a lot of industries don't see the purpose of doing so.
Also addressing that, how most industries basically, they just do not, they're very limited with like catering not only like the Black community but like people of color communities. We've shown in like makeup industry, clothing industry, fashion industry, music industry sometimes has been an effect on that. Also, furthermore, sorry, backtracking a little bit. I did address earlier that 3 of you guys have went to protest, and Helena, if you would like to just also elaborate. So Mitchell, you can elaborate on how just going to the protest.
I mean, go ahead, Mitchell.
Marching, I think this isn't an original thought by me. Marching is the purest way of protesting, because there's always going to be doubt with a petition if those signatures are real. We've talked about the black boxes and how you really only stay within your circle, but when you get out and you march and you go to City Hall, somebody in power can look out their window and they see you there. They can hear you calling for change, and they see that you're out there, and they see that you actually want something to change. So I think if you're having concerns over COVID, those are totally valid. If you actually get to a protest site, that's also valid. But just know that protesting is the purest form of protest.
I mean, my personal experience, it's very humbling to be surrounded by a community of people who share your ideals and are in support of each other, as much as there has been like backlash in the media about like the nature of the protest and how they turn violent or turn into riots or turn into looting. The two that I've been to, one was a drive-by, because of concerns of the coronavirus. That one was very short and sweet, but one where I actually, I walked 2 miles within like a community in Ybor right by, I think it was Young Middle School. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it was in the scorching heat. We were all sweating and it was hot, but it was so just humbling because we were all there together and people were passing out masks and water, and it's a solemn event because of the nature of what we're protesting against. But the solidarity and the support and the community that you find within that, like, it does give you hope that it is going to get better, and there are people out there who support you and stand with you in this. And I have noticed that because a lot of my friends have also been going to protests, so we'll talk about like the different ones that they've been to and my experiences versus theirs. What I've noticed is that the less cops that are present, the more peaceful the protest ends up going. So the downtown Tampa protest, my friends are tear gassed, had rubber bullets shot at them, like they're running away, like it just turned into absolute like terror. And, they actually issued a curfew to try to keep people from protesting. The city of Tampa did. So it was at 7:30 was when everyone was supposed to be home. So at 6:30, they started like launching tear gas and rubber bullets on the people to get them to scatter. And, that was just so completely different and far-fetched from the experience that I had, because the one that I had, it was in a neighborhood. We're walking around. The only reason that the cops were there were to direct traffic, so that way like we could just have a safe space to walk. And people were standing out on their porches. And when it comes to documenting the protests, like having photojournalism and people who are photographers there, I think that that's really important to capture those moments of peace and solidarity, and and also like recording the police brutality as well, so that way, you know, I can always trust what the media is perpetuating on us. So that's been my experience.
If anybody happens to listen to this that is still doubting the movement, whether or not it's a real cause or whether or not they really are peaceful, I would really encourage you to go to a downtown protest, walk with them for 2 or 3 blocks, and you will see that nobody in that crowd wants any violence, and that every single person in that crowd is speaking from their heart. They say that there is
just that Apollo, there is other protests where, like you said, more police, it became more violent. Apollo, you, it's wonderful that you're using your platform as a photographer to be able to capture these moments that are going on. And I did see that you did capture a photo of a girl in Tampa who later on, I don't know if you were made aware of it, was I think she was like detained by police and like been taken down by like I believe 4 of them. I don't know if you want to elaborate on what was going on, if you were there when it happened. But
Yeah, so before the marching started, we had everyone kind of, I don't know if any of you were there. I think it was the first that the it's an Instagram account called the Black Collective Movement Tampa, I believe it is. They held one at Critter 6 Park, and they met at the near the Museum of Art in Tampa, and there where Abbie, I don't know if you guys are familiar, he was arrested and charged with a felony for inciting a riot. Where the riot happened, I have no idea, but basically I was walking around taking pictures of everyone. Anything that I saw notable, anything that I didn't think other photographers were taking note of. And I saw a girl with an umbrella, a clear umbrella that she had painted with all these like slogans. Let me pull up the picture real quick. Stuff like "This is America," ACAB, all these other slogans. She was holding that up. I took a picture of her, and then later in the day, she was thrown to the ground and maced, and she was arrested and now is going into her senior year with a criminal charge on her. And to the extent of whether she is guilty or not, I don't want to say, because I've heard conflicting things from Black Lives Matter protesters, and I've seen different videos of what actually happened, and I'm not sure what actually happened because I wasn't up close. I wanted to stay towards the middle just in case something violent did happen, in case there was an idiot who threw something at the police, which there was on video. There was a guy who threw like a canister at someone. Give me one second. My computer's about to die.
similar to that. In Orlando, there has been gas, pepper spray, and rubber bullets all well before curfew, and the police have justified that by saying protesters were throwing rocks and water bottles. And I think if you agree with that narrative, you should also go to a protest and see sort of body armor equipment that these cops have, and then ask yourself if a water bottle is a valid threat.
Yeah, I mean, the irony that the police are meeting a protest about police brutality with police brutality just kind of speaks for itself.
I agree with that. I don't feel as if so I don't know if you guys had seen that photo that had surfaced about a week or two ago about a little girl who had a rubber bullet basically dug into her forehead, and nobody knows if that was intentional or not. But I'm thinking that maybe the police officers had been aiming at somebody, and because she was so short, she had been caught in the crossfire. But the thing that people need to understand about rubber bullets is that just because they're lighter and weaker doesn't mean that they're non-lethal. Rubber bullets are essentially just bullet casings wrapped in rubber. That's it. It's like It's like, imagine shooting like a 50 caliber sniper rifle bullet at the same velocity as a 45 APC, um, like pistol velocity. It is very slow, but it is still lethal, and it can still injure you essentially.
Also, they're being used in the wrong manner. They're supposed to be shot at the ground to bounce off onto the legs of not directly aimed and shot at, because it can cause, like, if it hits your eye, it can cause blindness. If it hits any sort of temple area, the damage can be serious. And although the chances of it causing death and it being fatal is very low, it's not, the rubber bullets aren't being used in the proper way. And also, just to point out that tear gas was outlawed, I forget in which world war, but it was not a humane or effective way to do battle, and they're using it on protesters in our own country, even though it was outlawed to not be used in.
And with the citywide curfew, they recently took it off because protesters weren't following it. In Orlando, they instituted a citywide curfew at 10 and a downtown curfew at 8 p.m., except they didn't stop the downtown curfew at where proper downtown is, kept it going into the poorest neighborhood in Orlando that is also predominantly black. And there were multiple instances in that neighborhood that suggest that people returning home from work after 8 p.m. were dragged out of their cars. They had their windows smashed. They were beaten and they were arrested for resisting arrest. They just happened to be coming home from it. That's really why we're seeing curfews enacted all around the country, is so that because cops know that people peacefully protesting aren't breaking any laws, they need to make a law that allows them to arrest these.
Sorry, I only had 3 hours of sleep because I was trying to think. So my brain cells are scrambled. This is what happens when you schedule a podcast, and then I'm trying to think. But yeah, just irony of oh, we're bored. How do we arrest people? Set up a curfew. I will say genuinely, I think this movement. It has been interesting seeing protesters, especially Chilean protesters in South America, and also Hong Kong protesters coming up and telling protesters here to utilize resources they've done, or strategies that they've done. I know that for a fact, and allegedly, so I don't get arrested, cops allegedly have been planting bricks in areas for protesters to allegedly use. How Hong Kong protesters are saying, oh, you should set them up so they can block police cars so they can't, run you over and stuff. And then also seeing recently in the news how officers are using the excuse, allegedly, to flash other people's cars because they're afraid that a person's going to use the car to then run over other people, even though those cars are specifically protesters' cars. I'm going to use Gen Z slang, not a vibe, but okay. But also, I think it is pretty important. You guys can also further elaborate on this to differentiate riots and protests, because they're even though there's a kind of a thinnish line or thickest line, however you see it, when it comes to crossing that, I think it is pretty vital for people to know that so they don't mix the two together, because them have completely separate motives. What's going on?
I mean, there's information kind of circulating that people are being paid to riot. No, I don't necessarily know if that's true or not. I think one of the most important things to acknowledge is that, you don't necessarily have a right or a say to dictate how an oppressed group protests. if they're so fed up with what's going on that they feel the need to go out and destroy property, you know, I personally don't feel like I have a right to judge them for that, because Super Target can be replaced, but the countless lives lost to police brutality and just lynching and racism in general in America, it just doesn't add up, you know? We can replace that Super Target. We can't replace those lives. So regardless, if there's no right way to go about getting your message out, the point is that, like, specifically speaking to the protests, you know, changes have been made. The murderers of George Floyd have been arrested. Breonna Taylor's case has been reopened. I'm pretty sure that there's like some legislation going into place, or at least in the works, where they're doing something I need to look.
I feel as if personally there's a very blurred line between protesting, looting, and rioting, as far as what people's intentions are, but also how it's portrayed in the media, because I don't necessarily feel that anyone should think that they shouldn't go to a protest just because they feel as if it is going to be violent, or they don't agree with the notion that people are going to be looting or rioting or destroying things or hurting other people. I feel as if you can tell what a protest is, what looting is, and what rioting is. The media hasn't done the best of jobs, I feel as if, when it comes to defending the people that are properly protesting. And this has pushed the narrative to some people that has kind of weighing them away from protesting, that this is violent, and has made the protesters look bad in the eyes of the media. But as far as the looting and the rioting goes, personally, I don't agree with it. I feel as if I understand that targeting big corporations sends a message to our country that we're done with the adversity, we're done with the injustice. It's like no justice, no peace. I saw that phrase going around. But there have been some cases where I saw that there have been small family businesses being burned down and destroyed, raided. And I saw a few videos of homeless people's property being destroyed, burned, stolen off the streets, and they had been left with absolutely nothing. I do feel as if, in the end, this will help more people than it has hurt. But in the moment, I can't help but think about all the people that it may also be hurting in the process of the rioting and the looting.
And on the topic of those rioters and looters, we see around the country white supremacists dress up protesters and go out and incite violence. We see undercover cops throwing bricks, throwing water bottles at police to try and provoke a police response. They can shut down the protest. We see white punkheads who have listened to Eminem and NWA and have now decided that they're experts on race and that they should go out and burn stuff in the streets. Even that example of the homeless man was set up by Alex Jones and InfoWars, as his crew harassed a homeless man, lit his stuff on fire, and then filmed it, and framed it as the context of, look at what these Black Lives Matter protests are doing. And that's a huge threat to the cause. So if you are at these protests, if you see these videos passed around, you'll look at who it is that's actually doing the rioting. I'm willing to bet that you will see one very, very common underlier, and that is the fact that people are predominantly white. I don't think that those rioters and those looters should be included with Black Lives Matter movement, because those people are not rioting and looting in order to better Black lives in America. They're rioting and looting because they don't like the police.
I feel as if why the media should be doing a better job of kind of defining that line between protesting and rioting and looting, because you do see that there are some bad apples that are mixed with a bunch, and it doesn't look good for the people that are really trying to make a difference within their community. Because I had seen and I had read, and I had seen that, like you said, like you mentioned, InfoWars and undercover cops. And what I had also read was that the KKK was recruiting homeless people and paying them to riot and protest and loot. So, and I don't see that anywhere in the media, that the rioters and the looters are different from the protesters. So that's why I feel as if the media should be doing a better job defining that line, because it is basically ruining the integrity of the movement as a whole.
And just another note on KKK. The KKK and other white supremacist groups are now openly coming out in parts of the country and just marching. And the cops are not shutting them down. They're coming out with assault rifles, chanting about lynching American citizens, regardless of race. They are just chanting about killing American citizens, and the police are not stopping them. And if you ask yourself, well, why is that? I think it's very clear. It's because the cops are more embedded in white supremacy than they are actual Black lives in America. Just as I think it was really interesting that you brought up the media is not differentiating between riots and protests, I would encourage anybody who's listening to this to go back and read objective reports about the Rodney King riots. Ask yourself how much of that was violent protest and how much of that was media lumping everybody together in one bunch.
So if you're thinking about going to a protest, if it's for any other reason than to support Black lives, then just stay home. Because it's not worth going out there and sacrificing the integrity of the movement. We were talking about how people are inciting violence, living out their anarchical wet dreams through this whole thing. It's not the time to try and create chaos, because then it ends up taking away the people who are actually out there fighting for them.
If your intentions, Helena said, if your intentions to go to any of these protests are anything but to support the movement and try to advocate for it, stay home. Probably go get some Ben & Jerry's, because actually they're a pretty good company, and I will buy their overpriced ice cream because they actually support the movement. Period. But yeah, also important about the riots and differentiating it and understanding that they're using it as a way of expressing because the voices aren't enough, how important this movement is. I think I'm going to start wrapping this up. You guys have been here for quite a while. Thank you guys so much for holding out for a very long time. If you guys have any statements to say or any messages of encouragement towards listeners to this podcast, go ahead and say them right now.
Definitely, considering everything that's been said this morning, this is definitely more than a trend. This is definitely more than just a thing to talk about this year and only this year. This is essentially a movement, and this is something that it should be kept in the minds of many people across America. And and not necessarily to keep like a trend going, but because this is much more than that. This is about people's lives, and this is to get people to live without fear, and try to right a wrong that is the system. So I definitely think that, considering everything said, that this movement is extremely important, and hopefully to we'll we'll get to be somewhere, or actually like we'll find a solution. So yes.
Yeah, just basically what we've been saying this whole time of like constantly keep like talking with people, keep yourself educated, do what you can to support the movement, whether it's protesting or signing petitions. And just it's a good time to reflect on the past and see what you can do now to help everyone and help everyone out, because like I said before, it's human rights. It shouldn't be a big debate about it. It should just be a time to speak about it. And
So I'm going to keep this brief. Stay positive, stay creative, stay safe. Yeehaw.
I think I've shared my opinion enough today. Listen to Black voices and respect Black lives.
These are tense and trying times, and it might be difficult to keep a positive attitude. Just keep in mind that likely the protests will be resolved once Lives Matter movement feels as though justice has been served, 2 lives lost, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, amongst many others. However, since the issues that we're fighting for go far beyond just their deaths, there's likely to be more protests in the future. Steps towards change aren't taken. So this isn't a 1-week performative act. It's a lifelong commitment to educating yourself, educating others, and making change so that way we can live in a world where we all feel.
I just want to say that I really do appreciate everybody coming here, sharing their perspectives, and sharing their stories, and letting everybody know how active they are within this fight to end racial adversity. All I can really say is that I hope everybody stays safe and stays educated and enlightened on the situation throughout the entire thing.
Do people listening just understand right now the world is watching us right now? New Zealand, Japan, London, India, the whole world, even Canada, that counts, that side, is literally watching what we are doing and what we are striving to try to achieve now, which is to ensure that people understand, know Black Lives Matter, and to reform corrupt systems that are in place in America today. And again, echoing what Cairo said, thank you guys so much for sharing your stories, sharing your perspectives, your opinions, that hopefully people listening listen to and take as advice, at least try to, or join this movement or become more active in this movement.